Good morning, everyone. You're very welcome to our second panel discussion this morning. I'm Tara Farrell, Chief Executive of Longford Women's Link, and I'll be your chair for this second session today. I'm joined this morning in studio by Dr. Nicola Brady from the Irish Council of Churches and Kate Clifford from Rural Community Network. And joining us online, we have Brian Doherty from Northwest Cultural Partnership and Owen O'Keefe from the Glencree Centre for Peace and Reconciliation. You're all very welcome this morning. So this panel discussion is focusing on the evolving social contexts and how they may or may not encourage cooperation and relations on and between these islands as well as with the rest of the EU. So we will be exploring how we might maintain and indeed strengthen relations given the current social contexts, and also look at what might be needed to do this. It's a big ask in a short time frame this morning, but we're looking forward to hearing the different perspectives and insights from our panel. So the format is very straightforward. Each of our panellists will give a 10-minute introductory opening, and then we will take questions from yourself, the audience, and we will also engage in the discussion. So please continue to use the chat for comments, and thank you for your engagement so far on Twitter, and the hashtag for today is hashtag CCBSConf, that's C-O-N-F. So we're anticipating quite a few questions. If we don't get to your question, we encourage you to follow up with the Centre for Cross-Border Studies. So on that note, I'd like to introduce our first panellist this morning, and Brian Doherty is from the Northwest Cultural Partnership and the Londonderry Bands Forum. Brian has been involved in the voluntary and community sector for over 25 years, working primarily in Unionist loyalist communities. He was previously appointed as the Community Development Representative on the Northern Ireland Civic Forum and an independent member of
So I think sometimes the perception is that unionists don't engage, and in my experience, it's always been the case that we have been willing to engage, and particularly in this city in Londonderry, we have been for a number of years. And I suppose in terms of my opening remarks, what I really want to, I suppose, talk about is give a wee bit of context in terms of why an alternative form of leadership has emerged within the Northwest here, within the Londonderry area and within the Derry Strabane District Council area, given our own experience as a member of the Londonderry Bands Forum and then latterly the Northwest Cultural Partnership. I suppose the first thing to put across is that, you know, politics and civic society here isn't binary, despite sometimes external perception and narrative that's put out there. A lot of the kind of ability to cooperate and the ability to engage in cooperation depends a lot on the socio-political situation at any given times, and also circumstances and geography based on personal experience and civic experience. And I suppose that's where Londonderry is quite different in terms of the dynamic in Northern Ireland. I've been involved in the community sector here for 25 years. I've grown up here, and my experience as a unionist in the city, I suppose, is quite different to the unionist experience in other parts of Northern Ireland. I mean, Derry has always seen itself as, I suppose, kind of out in the limb anyway, in terms of its sense of preferality. We've always kind of, without becoming parochial or kind of adopting the kind of standard Whinging Derry mentality, we have always felt, I suppose, geographically peripheral to the power bases, to Belfast, to Dublin, to London, and to Brussels. And being in the Northwest and the tip of the island of Ireland, that's always kind of provided a kind of broader context in terms of how civic society models have evolved. And then if you look, you know, I suppose within the context of Derry as well, being a unionist in Derry or a member of the PEL community, we're very much in the minority as well. So I suppose our kind of evolution towards alternative forms of leadership is based on that context. I mean, after Bloody Sunday, I suppose the whole dynamic of the city and the whole geography of the city changed. It implications for everyone in the city, and I suppose what is forgotten at times has been the fact that up to 15,000 Protestants moved from the city side of Derry across the River Boyle and out into further peripheral suburbs within the urban district. And so for a period of 20, 30 years, the Protestant community has always felt, I suppose, alienated and marginalised. And in 2005, when I worked at St Colum's Park House, we initiated a piece of research looking at the rationale behind that form of alienation. And although it was quite a stark document in terms of where Protestants saw themselves within the context of Derry, what did come out of it was this principle, this idea of alternative delivery alliances in terms of how that Protestant voice can feel more engaged, how it can be heard, and how Protestants in the city can feel more included in broader society. And at that point, I suppose we as community workers in Derry felt that we had to examine what other structures were out there in terms of developing community leadership. And if you fast forward a few years, I remember Dr. Haas came over to Northern Ireland during one of the stalls in the peace process, and he identified parading as a stumbling block to cementing peace going forward. And we as a group of community workers, I suppose, saw that as quite a bit of an insult, because we actually believe that the structures around bans and the structures around pro-union culture are actually the solution. If you look at the kind of areas of high multiple deprivation in Londonderry, most of the communities there have a band, a marching band. And we believe that, that within those communities, if you wanted to really reach the hard to reach communities, and that's the organisations and the people that we need to involve in. Because of kind of poor political leadership as well and other factors within Derry, there was always a sense of the need to build social capital has always been part of the psyche in the city anyway. During the mid-90s, during the parading disputes in the city here, there was kind of a sense of the need to negotiate. Although in hindsight, a lot of that negotiation was out of necessity. What it did do was kind of provide the platform for organisations like ourselves to kind of evolve that social capital from bridge into bonding. And for a number of years here in the city, we've established networks that have allowed us to develop an apolitical voice or an alternative form of leadership outside the mainstream political structures. So I suppose from our perspective, what we've done as a Londonderry Bands Forum is brought together the leaders within those bands communities. Because what we have found, and I've been involved in the community sector for decades, is that the real effect of community leaders within hard to reach communities can quite often be the band leader, not necessarily the youth worker or the community worker, but certainly the people, the band leader who has access to the most vulnerable young people who previously might have been attracted to paramilitary activity. So what really we've done has brought those organisations together and encouraged and developed progressive leadership within those communities. And that I think has been hugely successful, and not only reflective of our own city in the Northwest, but certainly in work we've done in more recent years. We find that that willingness to engage, that sense of having the voice heard and progressively, productively adding to civic society is right across Northern Ireland. I mean, if you look at the potential network structures, there's 660 bands in Northern Ireland with a membership of 30,000. And, if you add on then the people associated with bands, what you really have is the biggest cultural movement in Western Europe. And we've always believed there's a nonsense to ignore that movement and not explore the opportunity for using those existing networks to really contribute to collaboration and to peace building. We've since 2009, since the formation of the Londonderry Bands Forum itself, we've taken the lead, I suppose, the city in terms of putting our head above the parapet. We used the social structures that people like William Hay and Billy Moore and others had kind of broken the glass ceiling in the mid-90s to really develop that form of linkage. I mean, we in 2013, for example, we collaborated with the Culturland in Derry here to bring the flag Huel to the city, and we went from a bizarre position in 2013 to, in January 2013, negotiating with young people who were involved in flag protests, to many of those young people actually playing in gig rigs in the city in front of a largely, well, mainly nationalist community at the time. We've spoken to the Sinn Féin our days. We've worked collaboratively in terms of other cross-community performances with Culturland and others. In 2013 as well, probably the most successful paid-for event during that year was an event organised by one of our members, James Key here, locally the Wall City Tattoo, which brought together a cross-section of different forms of cultural expression and performance. And from that, we decided that we could expand this idea of cultural expression as a means of progressive development, and expanded the group to become a Northwest Cultural Partnership. So I suppose what we have here is an organisation that, I suppose, in reaction to that sense of alienation and reaction to the poor political leadership, political unionist leadership here locally, has found a voice. I mean, we now have a situation where we can get access to to the political leaders that we need to. I mean, the reason I'm not there in person today is because we just had we're having a conversation with the Secretary of State. So I suppose what the point we're making is that you can go through other forms of leadership when you need to. But a lot of that, as I said earlier on, depends on the circumstances within any particular geographical area. It took us, although we're probably in Londonderry at the forefront of that civic movement, it did take us a while for that to establish. It did happen embryonically. It evolved. We carried out a piece of research there recently, which kind of indicated and showed that it's taken our communities in the city here 30 years to recreate that form of local community identity. After the exodus from the city side, we had a series of disparate and fragmented communities, Protestant communities in the city here, and it's taken those 30 years for that structure, that community structure, to be re-established, but also for that realization that if you want to have a voice, if you want to impact positively within your community, then you have to adopt a self-help ethos. It's a model we're trying to evolve and expand across Northern Ireland, because I think it's one of our biggest frustrations is this negative narrative towards unionism. And in our experience, you can be unionist and you can be progressive. And certainly when we've been working in communities right across the province, from Randallstown to Omagh to Armagh, we're finding that same level of enthusiasm and energy for these alternative forms of leadership, and the willingness to engage, and the kind of sense that, particularly given the fragmentation within political unionism at the moment, that voice is very important going forward. Before I finish, I would just kind of like to bring it up to date and comment on I suppose, where we are now in terms of that leadership at community level. Political unionism is in a very poor place at the moment, locally as well. That's been felt. And as I said, the communities here aren't binary, but nor do they stand still. The ability to engage, the willingness to engage, also depends on political and social contexts at any particular time. And at the moment, it's difficult. There was civic unrest in this city at Easter, which spread almost like a domino effect across Northern Ireland. And you may find it useful to give a kind of, or to hear our rationale as to why that happened. The sense at the time was that it evolved primarily through reaction to the Northern Ireland Protocol on the back of Brexit. But to us, that was one ingredient in a toxic mix, which really created the civic unrest that we've seen. what we found, and it's important. These ingredients are important because they, it always kind of has the kind of ability to. They always have the ability to re-emerge. Our chairperson Kenny McFarland often talks about the fact that the decision makers, the political parties, and statutory bodies and like to remain invisible to the needs of the community, but they're to the PEL community, but the Protestant community themselves also like to remain invisible. And it's important that we recognise that because people aren't on the streets doesn't mean that there aren't concerns there. And what we found, to say, whenever we examined the impact of the civic unrest, we found 5 ingredients: the protocol, obviously, the impact of Brexit, and by that I mean the kind of anti-British narrative that has evolved since 2016 in Northern Ireland here. The sense that identity and the need to protect identity is back on the mix because of the sense that that all unionists were Brexiteers and very quickly were labelled as the right-wing Little Englanders. There was also this year around two-tiered policing as well, in the sense that it was around the Bobby Story funeral occasion, and a sense that the unionist community had lost the support of the police in that respect as well. But more, and also, of course, the issue of the lockdown and the fact that for 18 months those community structures and support mechanisms hadn't been there for 18 months. So I remember when we spoke to a young bandsman, they said that had the community centres been open and they had that support mechanism around them, had practice been happening, then they wouldn't have been on the streets burning wheelie bins or pallets. But to me, I think, and it's the biggest current concern within unionism, the main reason I think for the frustration and why the frustration boiled over into street violence was the political disconnect between grassroots communities and political unionism at the moment, and that, I suppose, is a current issue that we as community workers and loyalist heirs need to address and need to keep an eye on going forward, because if those issues aren't addressed, and the ability to provide leadership at community level and subsequently to engage either locally or cross-border really is in jeopardy, because it's very difficult to create bridge and social capital or communication when communities are entrenched in intra-community relationship issues. And I think that's the big concern as to where we are currently. So I'm happy to expand on any of these issues during the discussion.
Thank you very much, Brian. And I think there's a lot of really important themes coming through there around leadership and voice that we'll explore shortly. So I'd like to introduce our next panellist, who is Dr. Nicola Brady from the Irish Council of Churches. And Dr. Brady is the General Secretary of the Irish Council and the Joint Secretary of the Irish Interchurch Meeting, where she facilitates relationship building between Christian churches on the island of Ireland and collaborative action on the issues of shared concern to member churches. Nicola.
Thanks very much, Tara. And as you said at the beginning, there's some very big questions put before us for this panel. So it was difficult to know where to start. And as I was looking back over reports of consultations and conversations that we've carried out over this period with people, in my context primarily in the faith sector, working in community development and community relations across the island, there was one big theme that was coming through consistently that I thought I would focus on for my input. And that was that civic engagement by government and policymakers cannot be limited to what we might call the emergency response situations. And that was raised in the previous panel as well. And I think that's encouraging. So I'd like to just reflect a little on that from the civic perspective. So, as was also said in the previous panel, we've seen from the pandemic experience that government could not have mobilised the necessary responses across all areas without the community and voluntary sector, business and other community leaders stepping up. And in a Northern Ireland context, of course, and as Brian has just mentioned, we've seen the role of community leaders in responding to the outbreak of violence that we saw in April. And then there was the major role that they played throughout the 3 years when we didn't have our political institutions in keeping things running. So consistently, we're hearing a deep frustration at the lack of opportunities for structured, ongoing input into policy formation and implementation in both jurisdictions. So I think it's important to note that this is about more than just consultation, but it's real partnership that people are looking for. One of the things that we're working on at the moment is a research project with some academics in Dublin City University on the theme of the economics of belonging. And that's looking at how the faith sector can work with the wider community and voluntary sector and academia to have a meaningful dialogue with government in both jurisdictions around the wellbeing indicators to measure the impact of social and economic policy. And consistently, we're hearing that the most significant barrier to social cohesion right across this island is the divide between those who feel they have a stake in society and consequently a sense of hope for the future, and those who just don't. And for those who don't, there's that feeling of alienation that Brian has just referenced, and that can find lots of really harmful outlets. It can involve people harming themselves in the form of drugs, other addictions, people tragically taking their own lives, which we see in disproportionate rates in many communities across this island, but also in harming others through antisocial behaviour and violence, and with that violence often taking the form of hate crimes. And because the causes of this alienation are multi-layered and complex, government cannot be expected to come up with the answers alone. It needs the insights of civic leaders who can go to places that government can't and establish those relationships of trust. And because of those relationships, civic leaders in the community and voluntary sector in particular are key partners for the delivery of policy responses in areas like social exclusion, if those policies are to reach those who are most at risk. And in order to have a partnership that's based on mutual respect between the political and the civic leaders, there needs to be a cycle of engagement whereby they can work together to shape the policies, to deliver the policies, and then to come back to come back together to monitor and evaluate how those policies are impacting those who are most vulnerable and most in need. And often the engagement that we're seeing to date only includes part of that process, or as I said at the beginning, that you only see the efforts towards that kind of engagement when we're in moments that the media recognises a crisis. Community leaders across the island are warning very clearly that we now have a deepening social crisis. And our view of it has perhaps somewhat been obscured by the COVID-19 situation. But we need to be ready to respond, not just with short-term interventions, but with the kind of long-term, transparent, structured engagement that will give people hope that their circumstances can change.
A very positive message to end on. Thank you very much, Nicola. And I think that's a really important point about the emergency response. And, you know, in civil society, we're seen as essential services throughout the pandemic. So that should equally apply when we're talking about engagement. Our next panellist is Owen O'Keefe from the Glen Cree Centre for Peace and Reconciliation, and Owen has been the Assistant Programme Manager with Glen Cree since September 2020. Prior to this, he was the Senior Researcher and Policy Analyst at the Institute of International and European Affairs in Dublin. Owen, you're very welcome.
Sorry, mute.
Hi,
okay. Tara, how are you? Listen, briefly, I'd just like to say thanks to Anthony and to the team for inviting me to speak on this great panel. And at such a high-profile conference, it's quite the honour. I know I'm coming from a slightly different perspective as the rest of the panel, maybe as someone from the south, someone from lovely Wicklow, cloudy Wicklow, to be talking about political and societal conditions in Northern Ireland for post-Brexit cooperation. But I thought I'd focus on some of the commonalities between the jurisdictions, some of the challenges we both face, and some of the opportunities ahead of us. So initially, while the full context of Brexit is difficult to characterise to any definitive sense right now, I think we can accept that both relations north and south and east and west need to be reimagined, redeveloped, re-energised, strengthened, any more re's. Previously, the European Council provided the ideal forum for Irish and UK officials to present a united front on issues of common and mutual interest outwardly to the rest of the EU. From the very top level of prime ministerial and Taoiseach meetings to ministerial meetings, corporate meetings, where that united front could be presented, down to those discussions and meetings that took place on the margins of these discussions between Sherpas and policy aides and political advisors on day-to-day issues of commonality between them, to develop those personal relationships that have always been so essential, and to tackle challenges together in a coherent and a structured manner. And with those personal relationships, develop the freedom to challenge one another's positions and strategies. Now, in the absence of this forum, it requires us to reimagine ways to utilise that third strand of the Good Friday Belfast Agreement, that East-West London strategy or strand, to create opportunities to explore and develop cooperation, to rebuild some of those positive dynamics that have been so evident in the past. One of the big challenges that everyone can see is that lack of trust and that lack of maybe political will in some circumstances, which has been degraded throughout the Brexit process, unfortunately. That vital East-West Dublin-London relationship, which underpins so much of the success of the past 30 years, was built on a history of long mutual understanding and constant partnership, even when strategies and opinions or positions might have been disagreed upon. The partnership itself and the process itself was never abandoned. And as I said, so much of this has been damaged, and will take some serious political will to keep extending or to further extend that hand of friendship, and to rebuild these forums, both those formal forums and those informal, constant, regular meetings, which previously so naturally took place inside the EU. There are definitely opportunities offered by the conclusion of the Brexit negotiations, where Northern Ireland can enjoy an equally close economic relationship with both the EU through Ireland, as exists with Northern Ireland and the UK. This unique position does offer opportunities to organisations like chambers of commerce, business and employers, federations, trade unions to work closer, to enhance the economic and social cooperation across the islands, but also to learn from one another, to develop coherent plans to address some of the challenges that we both face across this island and the two islands. As a result of Brexit, Northern Ireland does need to make some choices now that it previously didn't have to make. Areas around data collection for Northern Ireland as distinct and separate region to the rest of the UK may become very important, both for the EU, but also for Northern Ireland, so that they can maximise their own economic capacity. And this is where economic organisations like the ESRI, the IDA, IBEC in the south, and their counterparts like InvestNI and CBINI must work increasingly close together to ensure that any decisions that are made with the best interests of Northern Ireland at heart and with the most relevant information available. This then extends, as Nicola was saying, to increased cooperation with universities, where structures are put in place to share academic research and funding, which ties into that long-term vision and long-term goals of Northern Ireland, Ireland and the UK as well. It's essential that this be fostered by really structured cooperation and political and societal vision in areas like infrastructure, especially the creation of a high-speed rail network between Belfast and Dublin, where people could live and work in both cities. But also, as a work-from-home enthusiast, extending broadband infrastructure, remote hubs, public transport, re-energising rural towns and villages across the island. We have these enormous challenges in front of us in common, obviously climate change being the main one, the marine, rivers, the natural environment, which can only be tackled with closer partnership at the very highest level, right down to rural and local partnerships, but east-west, north-south with the EU and with the rest of the world. So with political will and with trust, two things that are tricky right now, with increased dialogue with civil society, as Nicola mentioned again, that constant partnership, structured and ongoing partnership and cooperation with civil societies, businesses, academia, health conditions for post-Brexit cooperation could be extremely promising. But more importantly, it's essential that they're promising, because we're faced with these existential crises that can only be tackled together, really. So there we are.
Thank you very much, Owen. A lot to think about, particularly in the area of funding and resources, and we'll come back to that. Our final panellist this morning, last but definitely not least, is Kate Clifford from Rural Community Network. And Kate has been the director of RCN since 2013, having previously worked as a rural enabler with RCN's Rural Enabler programme, working to support the development of peace and understanding within and between institutions such as the Orange Order, the GAA, churches and others. Kate, you're very welcome.
Thanks very much, Tara. Okay, I'm here to lobby on behalf of Civic Voice. I start from the premise that I'm a community development junkie. I believe in collective action, collective vision, collective decision making, social justice and the idea of self-help. I believe in collective thought and input and co-design. And I believe that when you put a number of really good heads in a room together, however diverse and challenging it is often the best way to find long and lasting solutions to the problems we face. I also believe strongly that in times of change or flux, that in order to achieve lasting, accepted results, we need both robust and respectful relationships, something everybody has talked about today, but we also need transparent, honest and understood processes to reach those decisions. That's to say that everybody with skin in the game knows the rules of engagement and how to honour them and how to stick to them. Brexit. It's the disentanglement of co-joined twins. Two regions that are codependent and, to coin a phrase, inextricably linked, cannot simply be sliced apart without consequence. There is no oven-ready solution. There is no get Brexit done. This is complex, it's lasting change, and the disentanglement will take years, if not decades, as Jess said earlier on. To do that, the voices of the population who are impacted most, and to ignore them, is to ignore democracy. Decisions will have to be made about what can be saved and salvaged and supported, and we will have to know what we have to learn yet about how we will adapt to life with and without particular goals. And we have to seek out opportunities and potential wins from the changing circumstances. What we do know for certain is things will not be the same, and they can't ever be. And this brings me to the perfect storm alluded to by Brian earlier on. We have the pandemic, we have a protocol, we have peace under threat, we have paramilitarism, we have the past history of this region, we have political failure, we have everyday posturing, we have poor leadership, and we have propaganda on all sides. We are in a winners and losers game. You're either for us or against us mentality, and that creates difficulties for everyone. So what then for wider society? In a recent event, we asked people about their thoughts on Brexit, and people used the following. It was a one-word descriptor: disaster, unsettled, unclear, unsure, don't understand it, unstable, misinformation. And for me, the next three were really poignant: mistrust, afraid and threatening. There is confusion about exactly what the protocol is, how it fits with existing arrangements, and what it actually means in reality, and the changes it has brought about, and how it will impact on people's identity. The protocol has been caught up with the pandemic, and so people are really unsure about what is causing what. What became abundantly clear was that no one really had any clear handle at all on all the aspects of Brexit or the protocol or the command paper, or the implications for them in their everyday lives. There was also a huge fear that you could say the wrong thing or find yourself on the wrong side. So you could be a pro-protocol unionist or an anti-protocol nationalist, but the binary win-lose, green and orange, for and against debates give nothing to the space for compromise or solution finding. We've reduced everything to black and white, when grey is our reality and grey gives us the true possibility. So what would I ask for? Ultimately, the protection of our fragile peace process is the end common goal for wider society. It will take work, it'll take effort, and it takes inclusion on all our parts to make that happen. And that inclusion means looking at the minority voices, the people who are not normally at the table. We have forged a very fragile peace of sorts. We have deep wounds that still fester. The past hurts still haunt us and influence our actions. But we are moving forward and we are making small wins. Brexit has rocked the peace boat and its stormy waters have tested our peace resilience. But I believe that we can weather the storm only with good communication, good processes and faithful, honest relationships. Without these, we're lost. Unfortunately, Northern Ireland is akin to what we would describe as the drunken uncle at the wedding. Everyone likes us. Let's face it, we're all really likeable people. But nobody really wants responsibility for Northern Ireland because there are repercussions for loving this state. We are a liability to the UK and to Ireland. We are fragile. We're a problem to be solved rather than a region to be loved and cherished. So how do we steady a ship and navigate the waters ahead? I believe that we need space for dialogue, debate and discussion. We need to find space to fact-check, to question, to challenge and to counter. We need to create a clarity about what is true and what is not true, what is actually up for negotiation and what's unlikely to be changed or altered. We need space to enable both learning and growth of social groups, and we need a programme of support and clear, unambiguous information that helps people to understand what is at stake, what is likely to change and how that might impact on them so they can then articulate their feelings and the understanding of those events. In 2017, Centre for Cross-Border Studies and Nerwin and RCN met with the Secretary of State, Julian Smith, to talk about the need for civic space and civic engagement post-Brexit. A space to allow ordinary members of the public to come together to interrogate, to ask questions, to point out challenges and difficulties about the changes that this region is facing as a result of Brexit. We felt that such a space would enable minority and majority voices to articulate their hopes and fears, to change or to influence policy, and to alert those with decision-making powers as to the pitfalls and challenges of their policy when it hits the ground. If you like, it would have been a two-way flow of information. And if we go back to the co-joined twins analogy, this is about the surgeons making decisions, asking for wider opinion from the family who will have to live with the consequences of the decisions and the policies that they put in place. They have skin in the game, and the opinions about what might or might not work for them as a family, us as regions, are crucial to the decisions being made at the table. The request for civic engagement is not new. It stands on the shoulders of the agreements and promises made by successive guarantors of the Good Friday Agreement, the St Andrews Agreement, Stormont House, New Decade, New Approach, all of these key foundation building agreements. They bind us to commit to the development of peaceful, progressive society and collective action. And they all saw the value of civic engagement processes and wrote them into the papers. And indeed, governments around the world in recent times are instigating civic assemblies to get strong movement on some of the most challenging issues that they face as governments making decisions on behalf of their citizens. Nobody wants to be making unpopular decisions, but it's easier to do it when you have your citizens on side. But unfortunately, and I hate to add this on a negative note, but we are waiting on the sidelines ready to be called up and resourced to take our places at those tables. And we are being left behind as they march us towards division, instability and exclusion. So the choice falls to us then, as members of civic society, to seek forgiveness and not permission, to organise ourselves, to protect our north, south, east, west relations, to understand in the separation of the co-joined twins that the interdependence, the trust and the relationships cannot be sacrificed and will be dependent on collective action towards civic engagement. We cannot afford to let the prize of peace slip or the wedge of division to prize us apart. We must now together find the space, the resources and the process to support civic dialogue process, because without it we're lost.
Thank you very much, Kate. I'm going to stick with you, if you don't mind. You mentioned there at the very end about civil society ready and to be resourced. How has the resources issue impacted your organisation and the community as you see it? Because we know resources are an issue for a lot of community civil society organisations.
I suppose it's a delicate issue in that we are funded to a limited extent. As a regional organisation, we are funded to a limited extent by the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development. We're very grateful for that funding. But it doesn't in any way fund the work that we do on a north, south, east, west basis. It takes no account of that. It takes very little account of the engagement that we have with Secretary of State, with the Department of Foreign Affairs, with the UK government in articulating the voice, particularly of rural border regions. A lot of the work we've done, and I'm very grateful to the staff team that I have who had the foresight and the insight to apply for funding, to be able to gather voices and gather opinion from people on the ground about how Brexit and the protocol were impacting on them. We run regular meetings with a variety of groups or voices that normally wouldn't be heard at tables, and we look to include, we've a saying in work which is, let's look to see who's not at the table and let's try and get them to the table. So what are the barriers to people coming to our table? And then let's look to see how we can get them there. But that's not resource, Tara. And to answer your question, there is no resource for that. And that was what the plea to Julian Smith was this needs to be resourced. This needs a dedicated pot of money so we can put people on this full time who can enable and support and resource the civic society voice. And that still needs to be done. It has been promised, time and again it's been promised, but there is no resource for it. So people like Brian and ourselves, we're scrambling around to find money to do the work that we need to do that we believe will cement peace in this region and make this a place that we all thrive in and that we progress in. But that needs resource and it needs investment.
Thank you. Brian, I might just come to you on that question as well. You know, you spoke about, say, if we were to look at models of good practice, and you spoke about the structures around the bands as something that you feel is a good model. How has resourcing impacted your organisation?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I agree with a lot what Kate's saying there, but you know, in honesty, in the last year during lockdown, resources have been quite generous from the UK government, from SUPB, the Department of Foreign Affairs, and International Fund for Ireland, and others. To me, at times, I think we need to get away simply from the kind of element that resources are only based on finance. I think, to me, what's really important is you can put resources into time. You can put resources into listen to people. You can put resources into establishing structures that are there, identifying structures, and then taking the time to listen to young people and to listen to groups that feel excluded. And that doesn't necessarily need a financial commitment. What we found, a really interesting dynamic that's emerged in Northern Ireland in the last 12 months, we found, we did a piece of research that with Professor Pete Shirlow quite recently they're looking at the impact of where unionism sat in Derry at the moment, and then we've done quite a bit of consultation and dialogue with, as Kate has, with groups on the ground who were involved in the civic unrest. And to me, what we have found has been the emergence of a three-tiered structure, which is potentially quite dangerous. The community infrastructure in Northern Ireland is actually very good. I mean, when I started in the community sector in the mid-90s, it was very difficult to find any form of community infrastructure there, particularly within unionist areas. We fast forward 25 years through investment from Europe, from other donors. The community infrastructure, if you were to drive around the waterside or the city side in Derry today, you'll see a number of community groups or community hubs, community centres, mug-up pitches, sporting facilities, and workers there. But unfortunately, what appears to have happened more recently is that political unionism has seen the merits of that. And 20 years ago, it would be very difficult to get engagement from political leaders because they saw the community sector almost as a threat. Whereas now they see the merits of jumping on a bandwagon and trying to ascertain influence and votes through the very strong and professional community infrastructure that exists. The community sector below that itself, I think, is very professional. It's doing a lot of very good work in terms of youth provision, in terms of training, in terms of improving local facilities. But what unfortunately it seems to have emerged has been that a lot of the communities that they represent see this professional industry almost as another service delivery agent, in the same way as they look at housing authorities and councils and others. So there's been whereas the community sector in the mid-90s was very embryonic, there seems to be a growing disconnect between where communities themselves, residents, see the role and responsibility, their role and responsibility as volunteers and owners of the community associations, and where the community associations have positioned themselves as well. And unfortunately, below the professional community sector, a third tier has almost emerged, and those groups have become increasingly disconnected from the community sector and increasingly disconnected from political leadership as well. And they've created, they've evolved into the form of cultural and bonfire groups. Or the bands community ourselves would see ourselves within that third tier, but also sporting groups and rural clubs and lodges and women's groups that don't feel part of that three-tiered structure. And that disconnect's dangerous, because what we've seen happening within nationalist Republican areas in the last 10 years has been a similar process, but at a much more extreme level, where political nationalism has effectively controlled the community sector there for quite a while. That has manifested itself in dissident Republican awareness and dissident Republican activity at a much more serious level of violence. We've seen the murder of Lyra McKee, we've seen bombs outside Bishop Street courthouse, we've seen other attacks on police officers. Thankfully, it hasn't evolved to that level of violence within unionism, but we as community workers and as civic leaders need to be aware that we can't allow that process to evolve down those lines. We need to be speaking to those marginalised groups. We need to be bringing them into the frame to ensure that the thankfully relatively low level violence that happened in the estates in Derry here doesn't evolve into something a lot more serious in terms of physical attack. That structure, though, is very intra-community. It's actually within communities. The violence that evolved in Northern Ireland over Easter wasn't an attack on nationalism. It wasn't an attack on republicanism. It was a reaction to frustration within communities. So to me, the main resources we need to be looking at now, and it reflects what Kate was saying, is about taking time to bring those peripheral organisations into the fold. The days of demonising any element of society, be it loyalism, nationalism, republicanism, has gone. It's dangerous. They can't be seen to be outside the mainstream. So to me, the core funding is important. An element of resources are important, but to me, it's about sitting in a room. It's about taking time, go standing by a bonfire, going to a community centre and listening to the young people. That's where the resource is really needed.
Thank you very much, Brian. Nicola, I'll come to you. Brian has talked about the disconnect, the frustration you mentioned in your opening remarks about the alienation that people feel. How do we combat that? How do we create spaces to bring people together that we can overcome those feelings of alienation and disconnect? You know, we talked a lot about structures. We heard a lot about structures this morning's panel. What do you think is really needed?
Well, I think the work that Kate and Brian have just described is absolutely vital. There's no getting past that as the starting point. And some of the work that we've done in recent years, looking at what kind of interventions are helpful in overcoming, some would say, the cultural barriers that are dividing communities around the likes of contentious parades, etc. The essential starting point has to be a willingness to listen to people and a respectful listening. And what we hear resonating very clearly, particularly from what Brian's saying, is that some of these communities that are most alienated have not felt that experience of respectful listening. So we've been looking at it from a church perspective, and in recent years we have challenged church leaders to show up, be present in some of the communities that are most socioeconomically deprived, that were worst affected by the conflict. And they had to listen to some very harsh challenges coming back from the community, and some of the things that were said were, we are tired of church leaders coming in and trying to fix our community, standing outside, looking down. We need people to come alongside. And the other side of that is some of the most inspiring examples that I've heard, things that I hear about quietly that you will never hear about in the media, because the very polarised kind of situation that Kate is talking about means that some of the people who are doing the best work, unfortunately, are afraid to share it more publicly, so we miss the opportunities of learning. But some of the things that I've heard about are where clergy and others have come in and they have been regarded as honest brokers to get people from different sides of a divided community to sit in a room together. And what works well is being willing to say to people, okay, what has happened to you? What has happened here? Let people talk about how they feel about that, how they feel, their perception of how the other community has treated them. And only when you do that can you move people into a space where you start to ask questions like, what kind of future do you want to give to your children? And that's the kind of thing that helps people to move on. To support those community leaders to be those honest brokers, the question of resourcing is really important, because people are trying to do this on top of lots of other parts of their job where people have funding insecurity. That's a huge barrier for them. Where there's limited sources of funding, it becomes a source of competition and conflict, and that can be a barrier to collaboration, which is very damaging. We also see a lot of funding is very often targeted at innovation, innovative solutions, new projects, pilot projects, and that's a barrier to those pieces of work that enable people to be that consistent, trusted presence in our local communities. And I've heard it in very stark terms over the last year or so, where people have been saying that too often it feels like funding follows conflict rather than peace. So where you're successful at holding communities together over time, then funders lose interest and that work becomes jeopardised. So I think there's a role for government in that, but also in then providing the structures, because as Brian said, resources does not just mean funding, but it means those structures where when those community leaders have done that hard work, the listening, the trust building, that they are then able to bring those voices to the table. And if government doesn't provide the consistent, transparent structures, then people feel like all that consultation work, all that relationship building work has been for nothing, because it goes nowhere, or else there are a lot of promises and then it's very quickly dropped and it feels like everyone moves on.
Owen, I might just come to you on that point around innovation, because it does come up a lot, and sometimes we do have to ask the question, do we really need to reinvent the wheel here when there's so much great work going on in communities? So, like, from your perspective in Glencree as the Wicklow representative here this afternoon, what is your insight on that whole idea of innovation for future funding?
Yeah. I mean, firstly, can I just speak to one of the points Nicola made about the starting point needs to be the willingness to listen. I think that's great. It's so important. And the step even before that is maybe acknowledging people's hurt and their difficulties and empowering them then to come into the room. On innovation, I don't know, to be honest. From a Southern perspective, it's hard to say how that should be transformed in Northern Ireland. We're not there day to day to say what the tiny difficulties are and the nuances between the communities. We, of course, have our own difficulties with funding, as every NGO and organisation has. We're so thankful to the Irish government for continuing to support us, and to our members. But listen, I don't have the golden key to say what the answer is to this. Listening and learning from one another, the more the better, across the community, across the island and between the islands is essential, and allowing governments to work together and to foster the position where governments can come together and work together. But if anybody has the answer, I'd love to hear it.
I think a lot of us would like to make that comment about who has the answers. I've heard a couple of mentions of the media as we're talking this morning, and I just wanted to ask, how important do you think the role of the media is when we're talking about building these social contexts? We're talking about testing the health of the social contexts. And Brian, I might come to you with that in terms of the role of the media.
Absolutely, it's crucial. Narrative and language are very, very important in terms of peace building, in terms of impacting on negatively on peace building. And let's be clear, as I indicated earlier on, Protestants generally have an attitude of we don't give a damn what people think of us. We like to remain invisible, and it hasn't worked because we've certainly lost the cultural war, and one of the kind of ingredients I mentioned earlier on was kind of the anti-British narrative, and that has really evolved since 2016, since the referendum decision, and that's come through not just kind of mainstream media and social media, but also, more importantly and more alarmingly, through the increasing commentariat and also academia. The PEL community were very, very quickly categorised as the almost Orwellian 2 legs good, 4 legs bad thing. We're very much categorised on the right-wing element, even though, as Kate indicated, there were very, very many unionists who voted Remain. So it was a very easy narrative for the media to portray, and it came then. And really, what was really negatively impactful was how quickly the governments fed into that as well. We expected political opportunism from the nationalist parties in Northern Ireland, but very quickly the EU were very manipulative in where they positioned themselves, as were the Irish government, and then also the US government as well. We had the bizarre situations of every week. We had Nancy Pelosi, we had others standing on fields in Ireland saying where the border was, and kind of using the threat of Republican violence as a means of not insisting on a hard border across Ireland. Even last week, we saw a really alarming and bizarre lack of knowledge of political dynamic here from President Biden, and that does impact. I mean, and since 2016 to 2021, we did see this re-emergence of a sense within unionism that we have to kind of re-establish or defend our identity. We've seen an increase in flags, we've seen an increase in curbstones being painted, and with that kind of disconnect with political unionism, it was very kind of basic ways of Protestants outlining their frustration, and so I suppose we can't underestimate the negative impact of the media, and I think I would be making a call out, for particularly academia and others to realise that it does play a huge part and can have very much a negative impact.
Kate, I might come to you with that question from your perspective, from RCN.
Yeah, I think it's hugely frustrating. I think we have a media that at times is very irresponsible. It goes for sensationalist black and white issues. It doesn't look for the grey. It'll go for and that's their job. Their job is to sell newspapers, is to get clickbait, is all of that. But behind that, there's a set of, and we're back to honest relationships and truthfulness, and we're back to the end game of the prize is peace. And there has to be a responsibility with journalism. There has to be a responsibility that when they're picking up 4 or 5 children, setting fire to a bonfire or whatever it is that they're focusing on, there has to be a responsibility as to how that's going to play out and how it's going to be seen in other communities. And there's a code of ethics around that, which I think sometimes gets lost. And I wouldn't just blame the media for that. I think social media does that as well. So it's not always the formalised media that does it. I think there has to be, and we've talked about this as part of the North, South, East, West ad hoc group, is around the fact checker. Is there a place where people can go and fact check so that when ludicrous statements are made, just trigger Article 16 and sure the protocol will go away? It's not feasible. I mean, I was fact checking that this morning on Twitter with people who were saying, if you trigger Article 16, the protocol will go, which that's not even factually correct. So people, everything has been brought down or reduced down to either a black or a white or a green or an orange. And I keep saying we need to find the grey, because with the grey comes solutions. The media has a responsibility to help us to find that grey, and not always to be articulating the voice of those who would seek to shout the loudest. So we're back to what was talked this morning about megaphone politics. If we dial down the rhetoric, and we have intentional peace building, intentional compromise and solution focus, intentionally listening to those who are hurt, who are protesting, who find reason to have to mark territory or stand on the street. If we are intentional about listening to those people and creating space for them to have dialogue, we will take the heat out of this And I think we have to be very conscious about doing that. And to go back to the question you had earlier on about resource, part of the resource in that, and Brian is absolutely right, part of the resource of that is the people resource, and having trained peace builders and trained mediation and people who are trained to go in and do those listening exercises, those hard exercises where you walk into youth who are completely disaffected, who feel disenfranchised, who feel that there is no hope, and they have paramilitary control, they have a protocol that they don't understand but that they know is a threat to who they are culturally. And then you have young people who feel that they've won because they've left the EU and Britain's now in turmoil. And you have all of those mixes. And we need to find space for people to have the conversation, to fact check what it is that they think, and then to help them to be part of the solution as opposed to being part of the problem in the future. And that's about equipping people and enabling people. And that takes resource in itself. It takes trained and skilled mediators and peace builders. And my fear is, and I keep saying this to people, our generation who came through the peace funding over the last number of years, we're now older. We're now heading towards retirement age in the next 10 years. And when I look behind me, I need to see that there is a swathe of people who have those skills, those abilities and that understanding, who are not coming from that black and white agenda that they've grown up with, which has become a lot more stark with social media, that those people who are coming behind us have those skills and those relationships. And I think we need to do succession planning in our peace building and in our community sectors to enable those people who are activists in their community to continue to strive for the prize of peace. And they can only do that if they've got the right toolkit and they've got the right experiences to help them to find that way and find those solutions.
And that brings me nicely now to my next question, which is, you're talking about the next generation and the future. And Nicola, I wanted to ask you, where do you see the opportunities at the moment for that strengthening of relations and, just an improvement in terms of the social context?
Well, one of the things that consistently the community and voluntary sector and other civic leaders have been warned about in the context of Brexit is the need to protect our human rights and equality frameworks. And that comes through very strongly when you speak to a younger generation of leaders, and we've done some work around identity and belonging. And when you speak to young people, it comes through so clearly that for them, issues of rights and equality are so central to their sense of belonging, the kind of society they want to be part of, and the things that make them feel alienated, the kind of things that make them want to leave, or when they look around them and they see the constant political instability inhibiting progress on the key social justice issues. So things like housing, poor quality housing, not having the prospect of being able to get a home. They see a lack of employment opportunities, a lack of investment in their local area, communities being run down, just a surrounding environment that feels hostile and oppressive when they see things like hate crimes against minorities. So I think that's one of the areas where, in speaking out, you can energise young people and give them a sense of hope and a sense of their participation being worthwhile and meaning something. And obviously, the whole area of climate justice was mentioned in the previous panel, and that's one area where you see young people really taking the lead and you see a sense of energy behind that. If that's not matched by action in the political side of the equation, then the consequences of that are devastating, not just for their sense of belonging, but for their whole appreciation for the significance and the value of the peace process, because then you hear them say that they don't see the Good Friday Agreement delivering for them. And that's really heartbreaking. And that's where we need to be getting behind our young people, creating more spaces for them to be able to put the challenges to our elected representatives, because we still don't have enough opportunities for them to do that directly. And then also recognising that the civic voice is that counterbalance to a very polarised political leadership in a society emerging from conflict, and being very clear about how damaging this constant instability, the constant threat of the institutions being brought down and everything that goes with that is, particularly on young people, that we want to step up and be that next generation of leaders.
think it's fair to say that leadership is definitely a common theme in this afternoon's panel. We are coming to the end, so I just want to wrap up with a couple of final questions. And I want to ask each of you in turn, if you were to imagine that it is now the year 2022, so the year later we're back at the Centre for Cross-Border Studies annual conference, what would you like to see being done differently? What would you like to see that has changed? And Owen, I might start with you.
Sure. I mean, I know many people might disagree with me, but I'd love to see the protocol finally put through, the mitigations put in place, some of the structural challenges that people are seeing fixed, and then to focus on getting inward investment, to creating upstream and downstream linkages between North and the South, fixing the East-West structural imbalances maybe, to build up the SME sector around some inward investment to bring up the standard of living across the board, which would give a bit of breathing room to people to be able to look then at societal challenges that was mentioned before, the suicide rates, crime, drugs, everything. If people just had a bit more money, if more people had jobs, if more people had a sense of purpose in their lives, I think we would be going on the right track at the very least.
Thanks, Owen. Brian, same question to you.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to, first of all, I'd like to see that emerging sort of succession planning with volunteerism with young people, but certainly what we're hearing as well is that there's, again, as indicated earlier on, there's different dynamics, there's different nuances within civic society here, and young people have become so disillusioned with political leadership and other forms of civic leadership that they're not engaged in. So I would love to see those voices being heard, but in a way that wasn't through our process, where we had to wait 30 years or fill the void ourselves. And I think we need to get away from kind of the sense of negotiation out of necessity, and let's collaborate and negotiate through generosity, or through the spirit of generosity.
Nicola.
I would like us to have a formal structure for that engagement that would take in the 3 strands of the Good Friday Agreement within Northern Ireland, North, South, East, West, one that would have the political support that it needs to do what it has to do, and buy-in from across civic society. And I'd like us to be here talking about how we make that work. That's all. Small ask.
That's great. A great vision. Kate.
Mine is Nicholas. That's exactly what I would like. I'd like to see that we have a space, a civic space, to discuss and debate and challenge, that is a civilised space, that is a generous space, as Brian talks about, but is also a space that is a hopeful space, that talks about solution and possibility and finding the grey area, but also being generous enough to understand when people feel disenfranchised, why they feel disenfranchised, or why they feel disillusioned, and giving space for people to talk through how they feel, why they feel that way, and what can be done, or what changes or tweaks could be made to either policy or implementation that would give them comfort in order to be able to, again, and I go back to the prize is peace. The prize in all of this is peace.
And I think that is a most appropriate line to finish on this afternoon. Thank you very much to our panel, to Owen, to Brian, Nicola and Kate, and to you, our audience, for tuning in. Enjoy your lunch break, and we will see you back here at 2 o'clock.
The Centre for Cross-Border Study works really to bring about economic and social cohesion in nearly everything it does, and there's a number of specific areas where that happens. One is the annual conference that attracts a very wide audience every year, discussing topical cross-border issues. So people come from Northern Ireland, come from the Republic of Ireland and the UK. We always also attract a very high calibre of speakers, so it's a very good event and well known. We also produce an annual journal, and that provides an overview of the work of the centre and discusses policy issues by leading contributors to that debate. It's a very widely referenced source.
The Centre for Cross-Border Studies has a really important network of contacts because of the work it's done over the last 2 decades, because it's all about collaboration, it's all about cooperation. So it means we work with the most senior levels of the civil service in Northern Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, but also in the rest of the UK. And we also work with the European Commission officials, but also with local government and also with the community and voluntary sector, business representatives and the private sector more generally across these islands.
The Centre for Cross-Border Studies is unique in that it is an organisation which is clearly doing very important research into the impact of the border on our economy, on our society, and indeed on our political system as well. And that research has been hugely helpful to policymakers like myself when it comes to developing policies, particularly when we're looking at the impact of the border on the border regions.
The Institute of Public Health informs public policy to support healthier populations in Ireland and Northern Ireland. Set up in 1998, the Institute is jointly funded by the Departments of Health in Ireland and Northern Ireland. Our key priorities are promoting health and well-being, improving health equity, reducing health inequalities. We work to achieve these by focusing on evidence, policy, partnership. The Institute has a team of public health and policy development specialists based in Dublin and Belfast and undertakes work across the island, working towards healthier populations. Visit publichealth.ie for more information.
It's a very wide policy context because we're concerned with the policies from the Northern Ireland Executive, the Republic of Ireland Government, the UK Government, and indeed even in the European Union. But the guiding framework for all that we do is the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. And there obviously we're concerned about promoting good relations and mutual understanding and cooperation within Northern Ireland, between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, and indeed between Ireland and Britain.
The work of the Centre for Cross-Border Studies is extremely important in terms of providing and supporting the context for cooperation between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, but also between the island of Ireland and across these islands. And it's particularly important at this moment as we are, for example, facing the COVID pandemic and also looking forward to the recovery from that pandemic, which is a challenge for this island, north and south, and for these islands, but also in terms of the new context that we have come into in terms of the UK's departure from the EU and how that impacts on how we cooperate north and south, but also between the island of Ireland and GB.
Longford Women's Link heard about the Centre for Cross-Border Studies back in 2015 when we both attended a conference on active citizenship that was hosted by Longford Women's Link. And our respective visions for grassroots economic and social and community development were very much aligned. So we have been part of the Centre's New Common Charter initiative since 2015, and we see that as a key programme of sustained engagement and a really important model of good practice for future work on these islands.
Are you a cross-border worker, job seeker or employer? Then the EURES Cross-Border Partnership can help you. The EURES Cross-Border Partnership, helping border workers, job seekers and employers for over 20 years. Log on to www.eurescrossborder.eu for more information.
The Irish Government have a fantastic regional airports programme in place, fully recognising the support required to realise the benefits associated with regional connectivity. And we urgently need to seek a mechanism with all our government stakeholders which will deliver a similar operating environment. An environment in which City of Derry Airport can be supported with those associated safety and security costs to ensure a sustainable future, delivering connectivity which matches the needs and the ambitions of our entire Northwest region.
Well, the Centre for Cross-Border Studies was set up in 1999, and that was following the Belfast Good Friday Agreement with the support of Queen's University, Belfast and the Dublin City University. It's an independent research and information centre. It has a base in Armagh, and it's governed by a board with board members nominated from Queen's University, Dublin City University, and then a number of independents. It undertakes a wide range of different research reports in a number of different areas and provides information, advice and support. Probably the best known of the information sources is the Border People website, and that provides information for people who are living and working across the border.
The Centre for Cross-Border Studies has an extensive network of contacts that we built up over the last 2 decades, because all of our work is about collaboration, cooperation. So over those 2 decades, we have built contacts with the most senior levels of the civil service in Northern Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, but also in the rest of the UK and within Europe as well. But we also work with local government, with the community and voluntary sector, which is vital, and also the trade representative bodies and the private sector more generally across these islands.
We would encourage other people to get involved, because there's no harm in having conversations. The reality is that business found its voice during the Brexit process, but it can't be the only voice. It's got to get in there alongside policymakers, the third sector, get in there alongside our politicians to ensure that there's a deeper understanding, that there's an evidence base and an academic rigour to ensure that the right policy decisions are taken for the future.
The Centre for Cross-Border Study works really to bring about economic and social cohesion in nearly everything it does, and there's a number of specific areas where that happens. One is the annual conference that attracts a very wide audience every year, discussing topical cross-border issues. So people come from Northern Ireland, come from the Republic of Ireland and the UK. We always also attract a very high calibre of speakers, so it's a very good event and well known. We also produce an annual journal, and that provides an overview of the work of the centre and discusses policy issues by leading contributors to that debate. It's a very widely referenced source.
The Centre for Cross-Border Studies has a really important network of contacts because of the work it's done over the last 2 decades, because it's all about collaboration, it's all about cooperation. So it means we work with the most senior levels of the civil service in Northern Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, but also in the rest of the UK. And we also work with the European Commission officials, but also with local government and also with the community voluntary sector, business representatives and the private sector more generally across these islands.
The Centre for Cross-Border Studies is unique in that it is an organisation which is clearly doing very important research into the impact of the border on our economy, on our society, and indeed on our political system as well. And that research has been hugely helpful to policymakers like myself when it comes to developing policies, particularly when we're looking at the impact of the border on the border regions.
The Institute of Public Health informs public policy to support healthier populations in Ireland and Northern Ireland. Set up in 1998, the Institute is jointly funded by the Departments of Health in Ireland and Northern Ireland. Our key priorities are promoting health and well-being, improving health equity, reducing health inequalities. We work to achieve these by focusing on evidence, policy, partnership. The Institute has a team of public health and policy development specialists based in Dublin and Belfast and undertakes work across the island, working towards healthier populations. Visit publichealth.ie for more information.
It's a very wide policy context because we're concerned with the policies from the Northern Ireland Executive and the Republic of Ireland Government, the UK Government, and indeed even in the European Union. But the guiding framework for all that we do is the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. And there obviously we're concerned about promoting good relations and mutual understanding and cooperation within Northern Ireland, between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, and indeed between Ireland and Britain.
The work of the Centre for Cross-Border Studies is extremely important in terms of providing and supporting the context for cooperation between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, but also between the island of Ireland and across these islands. And it's particularly important at this moment as we are, for example, facing the COVID pandemic and also looking forward to the recovery from that pandemic, which is a challenge for this island, North and South, and for these islands, but also in terms of the new context that we have come into in terms of the UK's departure from the EU and how that impacts on how we cooperate North and South, but also between the island of Ireland and GB.
Longford Women's Link heard about the Centre for Cross-Border Studies back in 2015 when we both attended a conference on active citizenship that was hosted by Longford Women's Link. And our respective visions for grassroots economic and social and community development were very much aligned. So we have been part of the Centre's New Common Charter initiative since 2015, and we see that as a key programme of sustained engagement and a really important model of good practice for future work on these islands.
Are you a cross-border worker, job seeker, or employer? Then the EURES Cross-Border Partnership can help you. The EURES Cross-Border Partnership, helping border workers, job seekers and employers for over 20 years. Log on to www.eurescrossborder.eu for more information.
The Irish Government have a fantastic regional airports programme in place, fully recognising the support required to realise the benefits associated with regional connectivity. And we urgently need to seek a mechanism with all our government stakeholders which will deliver a similar operating environment. An environment in which City of Derry Airport can be supported with those associated safety and security costs to ensure a sustainable future, delivering connectivity which matches the needs and the ambitions of our entire Northwest region.
Well, the Centre for Cross-Border Studies was set up in 1999, and that was following the Belfast Good Friday Agreement with the support of Queen's University, Belfast and the Dublin City University. It's an independent research and information centre. It has a base in Armagh, and it's governed by a board with board members nominated from Queen's University, Dublin City University, and then a number of independents. It undertakes a wide range of different research reports in a number of different areas and provides information, advice and support. Probably the best known of the information sources is the Border People website, and that provides information for people who are living and working across the border.
The Centre for Cross-Border Studies has an extensive network of contacts that we built up over the last 2 decades, because all of our work is about collaboration, cooperation. So over those 2 decades, we have built contacts with the most senior levels of the civil service in Northern Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, but also in the rest of the UK and within Europe as well. But we also work with local government, with the community and voluntary sector, which is vital, and also the trade representative bodies and the private sector more generally across these islands.
We would encourage other people to get involved, because there's no harm in having conversations. The reality is that business found its voice during the Brexit process, but it can't be the only voice. It's got to get in there alongside policymakers, the third sector, get in there alongside our politicians to ensure that there's a deeper understanding, that there's an evidence base and an academic rigour to ensure that the right policy decisions are taken for the future.